I think we can get started. It's 1 o'clock. This presentation is upwards of up to about 45 minutes. And my name is Mary Feller, and I've been asked to present from Career Services at the University of North Dakota. What my title is, I'm a career coach and mentor coordinator. So what I do is I work with students and alumni, everything from undergraduate to graduate up to PhD. Students and alumni on lots of different things involving just career services and career preparation. So today what I've been asked to do is kind of cover resume, cover letter, and some interviewing tips. So feel free to ask questions at any time. I'll try and catch them as I see it either pop up in the chat or, raise your hand, whatever's easiest. And I love questions, so ask along the way. All right, so we'll get started here. So my first question, if somebody wants to, or a few of you want to put in the chat, what would you say is the most important thing to consider when building a resume? So let's say you are applying for a job. What do you think is the most important thing to consider when building a resume for a specific job? So let's see, chat. No spelling errors, absolutely. You can't have spelling errors. I know there's recruiters, if they see grammatical errors or spelling errors, they will toss that application immediately out. Anything else? What are some other important things to consider? Anyone else want to take a stab at it? So do you think it is good to send the same resume out to 30 or 40 companies that you're applying for? And why would you not want to send the same resume out to 30 or 40 companies? Does anyone know?
Ideally, because not every company is the same, so your skills, although they probably are pretty transparent, you should try to cater your resume to match that company the best you can.
Yep, you should. And the reason for that is, let's say you're applying for a large hospital type setting. I'll just use, in Grand Forks, we have All True Health Systems. They are using one centralized application system from everybody from laundry all the way up until CEO. Everyone applies through one centralized human resource management system. It is not a human being who's looking at every single resume. It is a computer software program that is looking for a keyword count. So they're looking to see how many words in your resume or your cover letter match the job posting for that particular position. So when I meet with a lot of alumni who are telling me, gosh, it's been a year, I haven't been able to find a job in my field, I usually say, well, let's start with your resume. Send me your resume and let me take a look at it. And usually I'm finding some issues with the resume. But what they're doing is they're doing exactly that. They're sending 30, 40, 50 resumes, same resume to 30, 40, 50 different companies, and they're getting very few interviews. So what I always suggest is when you're looking to apply for a job, you want to customize your resume and cover letter specifically for that job. So it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter to get a job. So I usually say print off that job posting, take out a highlighter and start highlighting, going through it line by line. Every job posting has a job description section where they're telling you what the job entails. And you want to highlight keywords in each of those lines and build those keywords into your resume and cover letter. Anytime on a job posting you see minimum qualifications, you have to meet the minimum qualifications. So you want to list those on your resume somewhere. There are some exceptions to the rule, because for PT, there are companies who will hire a student who is graduating, say in May, and they're contingent upon you getting your degree and or licensure. But before you apply for those jobs where the minimum requirement is, say, your degree and a licensure, I would contact the Human Resources office and see if you can even apply for that job. Because for some companies, if you don't meet the minimum requirement, you're immediately kicked out of the application pool. So don't waste your time applying for a company for a job when you don't meet one of the minimum requirements without having that conversation from HR. Because a lot of times, again, with PT, they'll look at hiring you earlier on, but make it contingent upon certain things. So how many seconds would you say an employer looks at a resume on average? So you've made it through the screening system, you get to a human being, and they're going through the list of resumes from the application pool that made it through the first screening. How many seconds would you say they'll look on that resume on average? Any guesses? Just throw it in the chat. 20, 40, okay. Any other guesses? 10 to 30, that's getting closer. 15, okay. The actual average amount an employer looks at a resume is 8 seconds, 8. So if you don't catch their attention very quickly on a resume, and they have a lot to go through because they have a lot of applicants, they're going to glance at it. If it's not looking, if it doesn't look like it's formatted nicely, if it's not easy to pick up on certain words, they're going to toss it to the side because somebody else's is going to look better than yours and you're making their job easier. Okay, so what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to talk about how to build your resume strategically. Again, one, customizing to the job posting, but just maybe how it can be laid out to get their attention. So what would you say are some important categories in the major or field of physical therapy that employers would be looking for on a resume? What categories do you think are important? You can throw them in the chat. Any ideas? Education, yep. Clinical experience, perfect. Anything else? Work history, yep. Any other sections you think they might be looking for? Because in order to be a practicing physical therapist, what do you have to have from that particular state, I'm even assuming? Yep, your licensure. Okay, so the top 2 categories I would think really is going to get the attention of a physical therapy hiring field would be your education and then your licensure, because those will be normally, at least for those who are looking to be a physical therapist, physical therapy assistant might be different, but those are the 2 top qualifications. You better put 1, 2 on your resume. Here is my education. Here is my licensure, or when I'll be taking the test for my licensure. So if you're looking to get hired early, at least give them an idea of when you're going to be testing for it. The other thing is somebody mentioned clinical experiences. So however you want to call them, relevant experiences. Maybe you've worked in the medical field, working with clients in a different facet. Leadership experience. You can even call some things other experience. So maybe you've had work experience, but not in a relatable setting. You can even list that work history. Skills, because in almost any job posting, there are some skills that they're mentioning that are needed, and you can have a skills section. And then if you were involved or professional affiliations, that always looks nice as well. Maybe you're part of the American Association of Physical Therapists or something to that effect. So I usually say employers like to see you get to the point. So most employers really love to see a 1-page resume, but you can go up to a 2-page resume. So one of the questions is, should we include undergraduate work or just physical therapy school? You can include both. It really depends on, because you're going to be including both of your degrees. Because if you received, say, an undergraduate degree in psychology and then went on to physical therapy school, you have 2 degrees you'll be listing on your resume. So you can add undergraduate as well as physical therapy experience. Don't go back to high school, because everybody should have a lot of stuff since high school. So nothing high school, but you can add undergrad and graduate programs. So here, I'm going to break this down so you don't have to go blind trying to read this, but I'm going to break down each of these sections. So here's an example of what a physical therapy resume could look like. So You can either have a resume or you can have a CV. A CV, in fact, you know, going for your doctorate of physical therapy, you really want to have a CV just to keep track of your life's work. Maybe you've gone to conferences or presented or are published for something or doing research, whatever it may be, have a CV. And some employers will take a resume or a CV, but if they're asking for a resume, your resume should be the 1 to 2 page, 1 full page to 2 full page resume. So what I'll just quickly point out to here and then break it out into the sections is when you look at this, you're actually seeing how cleanly it's laid out. So the most important experiences are bumped up near the top, and that would be education, licensure, and clinical experience, because those are your most relatable experiences going, you know, when you're going to be graduating from, say, a doctoral program and going into the world to apply for a full-time job. Now, eventually, once you have full-time job experience in the field, those clinical experiences will drop off, and you're really just going to be including your relevant work, your professional work history. But for your first position, and even maybe even the second position, just depending on how much experience you gain, that clinical experience is where you're going to be able to use those keywords the best and pull them into your resume. Related experience, maybe you were a physical therapy assistant before you went on to pursue your bachelor's and doctoral program. So that's related experience. So again, looking at this, you see the right amount of bolding. You see that the page is being utilized to its fullest from left to right, top to bottom, because what you don't want to have on a resume is white space. And what happens when a lot of students are using templates, a lot of templates have a lot of white space, and you're never going to make it through a screening program with white space. You're going to make it through a screening software program by filling in that white space with words. So I recommend using a plain Word document. I like to use the bottom border tool to get that nice line. And then I like to chunk everything together and smush segments together and then space in between. It really gives you the right amount of information on a page and to utilize it to the full extent. So the largest thing on a resume should be your name. Your name can go up to 16-point font, but everything else, I would start with 12-point font, 11-point font. Getting down to 10 gets a little bit smaller, but you can mess around with the margins and the font to get it to fit to 1 full page. Or if you really have that much experience, 2 full pages. I think to get into physical therapy school, if you needed a resume, it's nice to have 2 full pages because they like all the extra fluff. They want to see you were involved and volunteered and shadowed and all that. But when you're applying for a full-time job, that's when you really, it's best to just get to the point, because employers and recruiters, they don't have a whole lot of time. And so they just want you to, they don't want to read a whole bunch of pages of anything. So that would be my recommendation. If you can fit the most relevant stuff on 1 page, that's what I would go with. So I kind of pulled this out a little bit and blew it up just to kind of go through a few things. So for professional email, I would, if you have a UND email or if you're using a school email, I'd be careful of using that on a resume after you graduate, because most of your college emails will go away within 6 months, I think, of graduation. So I would have a professional alternative email, like something with your name in it, you know, mary.feller@hotmail.com or Gmail. And then even have a LinkedIn account. For those of you who don't know what LinkedIn is, it's a professional networking site. So it's like a Facebook, but really the only thing you're putting on there is professional work information, and you're connecting with your colleagues and peers. If you have a LinkedIn account, I would also add that to your contact. And then once you update a resume, you'll want to update that LinkedIn account just so it looks similar. I see sometimes students will update their resume and they don't update their LinkedIn and they look like 2 different people. So just don't forget, if you're going to include that LinkedIn, it should look like your resume and be updated. So you want to spell out a degree. So if you got a bachelor's degree, don't give yourself a BS degree. You want to give yourself the Bachelor of Science in, or a Bachelor of Arts in, whatever major you were in. Month and year of graduation, you can throw a GPA in there, just follow the same number of decimal places as that GPA, and then again, have the correct wording of your degree. So just, you'll want to check with your campus or your program to make sure you're listing that degree correctly. And again, here is just an example where let's say somebody's graduating. Oh, this was wrong, but let's say they were graduating May 2021, and then their exam was June 2021. So you want to put that on there, again, if you're applying early for those positions before you do have that licensure. For this is kind of how clinical experience can be broken out. So you can break it out by clinical locations and then talk a little bit about it. The most recent should be at the top. So for any section that you're doing, it's in reverse chronological order by date. And the most recent, again, would be at the top of that section. So you could talk about where you did that clinical experience and then use the right action verb to start off your bullet point. So since this is currently ongoing in this example, they're going to use present verb tense. So instead of treating clients, don't do the ing, just do treat, collaborate, manage. If the job has ended or the clinical has ended, you're using past tense with the ed, assisted, participated, presented. Anytime you can throw in a metric, that gives a little bit of scope. So for example, maybe you did something at Altru and it's a 452 bed facility. Maybe you want to even throw in your hours. Sometimes I see a parentheses after where they did it and it says, 60 hours or 6 weeks or 4 weeks or 3 weeks or however you want to do that. But again, when you're creating these bullet points, this is where you're going to customize for every single job that you're applying for. So you might want to say the same thing. Students get caught up a lot of times with, I got to talk about exactly what I did. You do, but you can use some key words that you're pulling into that from a job posting. So, oops. So again, you're using action plus skill plus task and an occasional result for your bullet points. So I'll share some documentation that we have for our students that are out on our website, where you can kind of build that effective bullet point. So, and we say 3 to 5 bullet points for every relevant experience, but you're going to have to gauge that based on how long your resume is. Because again, you don't want to go to a page and a half or go over 2 pages. You want to make sure that you have the right space. So sometimes it's only like 2 or 3 bullet points. Sometimes you'll have space to add a little bit more. I would also talk more about the areas that are more relevant to where you're applying. So let's say you are applying for a physical therapy position at Altru. I would probably use the most bullet points under your Altru experiences and maybe a little bit less for Sanford or some other clinic. So that would be another recommendation of mine. So here's related experience. So again, a lot of times I'll see work history on a resume and students will put that maybe they were a physical therapy assistant right next to they were a server or, a dog washer at Petco, or, they kind of put it next to just the last job they had before that. And the problem that I see with that is it really starts to take away from how relevant this particular position is. So I would always separate out any experiences that are relevant to physical therapy, whatever it may be, just medical, working with clients in a medical type situation, and put that again as a related experience higher up than some of those other types of experiences. And again, here you do like month and year to month and year would be the best format. You can go back and show involvement again, especially since, this may be the first job you're applying for after getting your major or your degree. So you could go back to what you did in undergrad or, in your doctoral program or whatever you're in. And you could talk about where you volunteered or member. Now you don't want to get too crazy because sometimes I know students who were applying for the pre-professional programs had a ton of volunteer service and were members of a lot of things. You don't have to list everything. Maybe pick a few things that were relevant or where you think you might connect with an interviewer. And you can put that as a campus or community involvement. Professional affiliation. So maybe you weren't as much volunteering or a member of anything, but maybe you are in a professional affiliation. You can list that. I like to have a skills/certification section, because skills could be, whatever you use for charting. I don't know how, I know for nursing, sometimes it's Epic. So for physical therapy, think of software programs that you use. You could include that as well. Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint. So I like to even see a combination of a certification/skills on a resume in the healthcare fields. So these are some skills employers are looking for in graduates. So they're looking for strong written communication skills. And that is why employers love to see cover letters, because what happens a lot is the resume is done. They've got it perfected. Students are sending 20 or 30 the same one out. So that's pretty good. But then they start to write, and the cover letter doesn't seem to match the resume. The communication skills are a little run-on sentence-ish or fragmented sentences, or there are no commas in there and you just wrote a 3-sentence long sentence. Or a lot of the sentences in a cover letter starting with I, so it gets a little choppy. So that's where a lot of times employers are really looking at that communication skills, because if you can write eloquently and articulate your skills, I think that says a lot to an employer. And another thing that some people think about, I'll just even go to the bottom, is the fluency in a foreign language. So under your skills section of your resume, maybe you took 3 years of Spanish, 3 levels of Spanish in college. I would say you're proficient. I would assume. You could put English parentheses fluent, Spanish parentheses proficient. So that way, in the medical field, as a physical therapist, what if you're working with a client who speaks primarily Spanish? That could be an asset for you. Or maybe you're going to apply for a job in an area that has a lot of Spanish-speaking clientele. That could give you that added edge. So I like to kind of look at fluency in a foreign language is nice. Employers, so the National Association for Colleges and Employers did a survey, and they surveyed employers asking about where they thought students ranked after they graduated from their degree. 1 to 10, 10 being great, 1 being not so good. And they asked students the same question, where students had to rank themselves. So let's go back to communication. Where do you think students ranked their communication skills? 1 to 10, 10 being the best. Throw it on chat. What do you think? Where do you think students, when surveyed, that they ranked their communication skills? That's written or verbal. Any ideas? 6, 7, 8. Yep, that was pretty close. They were about an 8. So students were pretty confident, and I'm not saying some of you in the physical therapy program, I'm sure you're very eloquent, but students were saying they were ranking themselves at an 8. What do you think employers were ranking students as far as communication skills? 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And this is nationally, a national survey. 5, 6, 6. Try between 3 and 4. So there is a disparity between what students think they can do in an interview or on paper than what employers are expecting students should be able to do. So there are some employers who are very picky. And so that's when I say, somebody said you can't have grammatical errors, you can't have spelling errors. No, you can't, because they expect that, especially if you're graduating with your doctorate. There was one area out of the 20 that employers ranked students very, very high these days. What do you think that might be? Teamwork? Nope, that wasn't it. Any other ideas? What do you think your generation, I'm just gonna assume yep, somebody got it. Computer skills, technical skills. Because you grew up, many of you, not all of you, grew up with technology in your hand. An iPod, an iPad, or some sort of computer technology. Where back in my day, it was like 7th grade, we finally got Oregon Trail on a computer that's half the size of my dining room table. I mean, it was just, you know, I didn't get a cell phone until I started working. I didn't even get a computer until I got my second job out of college, which was in 1998. That was when I got my own personal computer at work. So to give you a little bit of an idea, it's come a long way. And so you have the technology skills to really go take leaps above my generation. And I know I look close to your age, but I'm really not. No, I'm just kidding. But so for bullet points, this is again, you're taking the action verb, the skill, the task, and the result. And when you're picking that action verb to describe what you've done in your bullet points, make sure you sound like a physical therapist. So pick words that sound, avoid words like help, work, and assist. Those are rudimentary. Those are elementary. Let's elevate the language and use words like facilitate, demonstrate, implement, prepare, perform. You know, elevate that language, and it's going to make you really sound professional when you're applying for those positions. So for a cover letter, does anyone have a question on resume before I jump to cover letter?
Could you briefly talk about using color on your resume?
Sure. Well, this is the thing. When you're applying for a job, you can apply in color, but when they go to print it off to give it to the committee members, most companies are not going to print it in color. They're just going to print it in black and white and hand it out. And so what happens then is the shading. It looks like a weird shade of gray. So the only time I recommend color or jazzing it up is if you're a graphic designer, then you really are in a field where you should be a little bit more flavorful in your application. But for the most part, I would keep it black and white. Don't put a picture on your resume. Just keep it simple, like the example that I mentioned. Any other questions for a resume? That was a good question though. Okay, so cover letter, what you want to do in that is you want to mention how you found out about the opening, describe your knowledge of the company, and talk about how your experiences in the classroom or work experiences have prepared you for the job. You don't want to regurgitate word for word in the same words what you listed on your resume. You don't want to mention all of your experiences and skills. You don't want to start every sentence with I or my, or use unprofessional or emotional language. And recruiters cringe when they kind of start to hear the same words, like I have a passion for. Passion has become a cliche and it's overused. So try to avoid that sort of emotional language. So what would go into a cover letter? And again, I'll share all this information with the person who asked me to speak, and she can share this with the conclave. But the first paragraph, that is your objective. That is where you're going to state what you're applying for and maybe how you found out the position. Also your strongest qualification. So I am applying for the physical therapist position at All True Health Systems as advertised on LinkedIn. In May 2021, I will graduate with my Doctor of Physical Therapy degree from the University of North Dakota and plan to take my licensure exam June of 2021. My background, experience, and education seem to align well with what you were looking for. It's just an opening statement. And then that second and third paragraph. So this first paragraph, you can just tweak that from job to job. You don't have to completely reinvent the wheel every time. The second and third paragraph, this is where you really got to look at the job posting and talk about how your experience and education aligns with the position description. So again, let's say you did physical therapy in your clinical rotation. I'm just going to use All True Health System again. Maybe you did it there. I would talk about your clinical experience in All True Health System in that second paragraph. Maybe your third paragraph, what other experiences make you stand out? Maybe you were a physical therapist assistant before you decided to go on and pursue your education. You have great related experience you can talk about in your work history. You could even mention, additionally, I speak 2 languages, 3 languages, or I took a medical mission trip to a certain nation, and maybe you were able to work well with diverse populations because maybe you're applying to a position that has a lot of diverse populations. So you could talk about why you'd be a good fit in that area. And then that final paragraph, you can cut and paste that till the end of time. So you're respectfully requesting an opportunity for an interview. Here is my contact information. Thank you for your time and consideration. So really, half of it you can cut and paste and just slightly tweak. These 2 are what's most important, that you talk about what's most relevant to that position. And this is what it looks like. It's a standard business cover letter. So the date, the address of who you are addressing it to, dear, whatever the position title is. So physical therapist, search committee, or if you're sending it to a person specifically, dear first name, last name, or dear doctor, first name, last name. There's your 4 paragraphs. Thank you, sincerely. Throw in a signature font. And then again, your contact information. So this is, you want to use the whole page, because if you don't use the whole page, it almost seems like you don't have enough to talk about. But you never want to go over 1 page. Okay, any questions on cover letter before I get to interviewing? Because there's lots of good stuff in interviewing. Okay, so I'm doing a lot of practice interviews for students applying to like PT, med schools, all that fun stuff right now. So a lot of the interviews happening right now because of COVID are being done via Zoom or phone. So the main thing, and I'm sure most of you understand this, is I would, even on a phone interview, dress professionally and stand up, because I feel like you project your voice a lot more when you're at attention, you're dressed for the part, you're ready to go. You just want to have, in both cases, a quiet situation. So if you have animals, we all are on Zoom, and there's always somebody's dog who's going nuts in the background, or pretty soon we see Fluffy jumping on the back of the chair. You want to have those animals contained or out of the area so they're not going to make noise. Or if you have a roommate, make sure they're not there. Tell them to get lost for an hour, and that you'll buy them some food later on or something just to pay them off. But again, the key is quiet space with good internet. And when you're doing the interview, what you don't want to be doing is this or this. You want to lift up your computer so it's centered, and that when you're responding, you're looking in the camera. I see a lot of weird lighting sometimes. There's lights coming from the ceiling. It looks like students are going to get beamed up into outer space, and it just is distracting. So you just want to have a professional background, which a bed is not a professional background. And everyone's kind of living in their bedroom or in their apartment right now. So I've even had students applying for med school that we have determined they're going to flip their mattress off to the side of the room so that you cannot see there's a bed there. And then there's just more of an office looking setting. So again, you can have notes. Like if you're a phone interview, have some little notes, or even if you're Zooming, you can have just some prompt cards to the side with big words on it. You don't want to read a card because it's going to come through like you're reading, but maybe there's an example. You're like, oh, what example should I use? And as you're thinking, the card's over there, and then you're like, I got it. And then you can start talking. So that would be my suggestion there. And then for interview questions, has anyone done a professional interview or any sort of interview where you were asked a question that just completely threw you off? I'm just curious what that question was. Any oddity sort of questions? Any questions you were like, gosh, that was a tough question to answer? Even when you were applying to PT school.
Not so much like a tough question, but no, one thing we're talking about in class lately is when they bring up pay or salary, to be able to like provide almost like evidence, or like if I see,
what is your salary requirement?
yeah, if I, like if I see X amount of patients per day, I'll generate this much revenue. But having more of a substantial answer versus, well, I don't know, like whatever you want to pay me.
Okay. Okay. That's a good one. We'll cover that. So any other weird questions? Anyone else? But that's a good question. That does get asked. And I have that as one of my questions. Okay. So the first one they tend to ask is, tell me about yourself. And this, from when I used to do interviews, this was the make it or break it question when I was interviewing candidates for positions I was hiring for. You're either like, oh, I really like this candidate, this is a good start, or else you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, we have 8 more questions to ask this person, and this is not the right person for the job. So for this one, you want to give them just give them a good, well-rounded answer. You really can't get this wrong, and use a timeline, Oh yeah, a little bit about myself. My name is Mary Feller, and I'm originally from St. Paul, Minnesota. Growing up, I was always interested in helping people. I used to volunteer at a hospital, which led me to pursue a degree in whatever. While at UND pursuing my psychology degree, I was actively involved in, at the same time I was working as a CNA, So talk about your undergraduate degree, what you were doing. Go on to what you were doing in your PhD program, where your clinicals, just touch on it. You're touching on all this stuff. Like, I've recently completed a total of 12 weeks of clinical experiences, varying from this area to that area. For fun and enjoyment, I like to something. And I'm just so excited to be here today for this opportunity. So thank you for having me. So that's a nice way to end it. And if you know who you're interviewing with, cheat. Go out to their Facebook and see if you have something in common. Because what if they're a marathon runner and you just ran grandma's marathon, and you're like, oh my gosh, they love to run too. Maybe I could find a running partner. Well, runners love runners. So maybe in something interesting about yourself, you could say, I love training for marathons. I recently ran grandma's marathon, and I'm always looking for a running partner, and da-da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden, that person's going to be like, I just ran grandma's. Oh gosh, what was your time? All of a sudden they like you because they could see themselves working with you and maybe even running with you. So again, answer this in a well-rounded way. Give them enough information about yourself so that they can make a connection. And that's like, where are you from? Things you've done, organizations you're a part of, where you've worked. It's just a lot of things that you can connect on that level. When they ask for strengths or weaknesses, this could go either way. So we've had students, normally we're like, if you have a weakness, tell them what you've learned from it and how you're overcoming it. That did not go well during medical school interviews, where they came back and said, you just gave me a strength. That's not a weakness. I want to know a weakness.